"Dad, you need to know something before Mom marries him." Lily's voice was barely louder than a whisper, but the words stopped Ethan Carter in his tracks. He had been standing near the entrance of the elegant country club, watching guests arrive for the wedding rehearsal, trying to convince himself that he was completely fine. He wasn't. Across the room, his ex-wife, Emily, was laughing softly beside her fiancé, Daniel Brooks, a man Ethan had met only a handful of times. Daniel looked confident, polished, and perfectly at ease, the kind of man who seemed to belong everywhere he went. Emily looked happy too, at least from a distance. And Ethan had spent the past 3 years telling himself that her happiness was all that mattered. Then Lily had run straight across the room and grabbed his hand. Ethan looked down at his 9-year-old daughter. Her eyes were filled with worry, and she kept glancing over her shoulder toward her mother. "What is it?" Ethan asked quietly. Lily swallowed. "I promised Mom I wouldn't tell." "Then why are you telling me?" She hesitated for a moment before squeezing his hand tighter. "Because I don't think she knows everything." Ethan felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest. He crouched beside Lily, keeping his voice calm. "Everything about what?" Lily looked toward Daniel. He was speaking with several guests, smiling as though nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. "About him," she whispered. Ethan followed her gaze. For a moment, he almost laughed at himself. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe Lily had simply misunderstood something she had heard. Children sometimes connected pieces of conversations without understanding the whole story. But then Lily reached into the pocket of her little cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found this in Mom's room," she said. Ethan stared at it without touching it. "What is it?" "I don't know. But I saw Daniel looking for it yesterday." Ethan's expression changed. He slowly took the paper from her hand. It was old, slightly worn around the edges, and there was no name written on the outside. Before he could unfold it, Emily called from across the room, "Lily?" Lily immediately stepped closer to her father. Ethan looked toward Emily, and for one brief second, he saw something in her expression that he had not seen in years. Fear. Then it disappeared. Emily smiled and walked toward them. "What are you two doing over here?" Lily looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Emily. And suddenly, the wedding he had been trying so hard not to think about no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like the beginning of a question he should have asked 3 years ago. "Nothing," Ethan said, slipping the folded paper into his jacket. "We were just talking." Emily smiled, but her eyes stayed on Ethan for a second longer than they should have. Then Daniel called her name, and she turned away. Lily leaned toward her father one last time and whispered, "Dad, please don't let her marry him until you find out what's on that paper." Ethan waited until Emily had walked back toward the guests before he unfolded the paper. He expected to find a note, perhaps a receipt, or something Lily had misunderstood. Instead, he saw a short handwritten message dated 4 years earlier, only a few months before his marriage to Emily had ended. The first line made his stomach tighten. "Emily, you cannot trust what Ethan told you." Ethan read it twice, certain he had misunderstood the words. There was no signature at the bottom, only a phone number that he did not recognize. For a moment, the noise of the rehearsal seemed to fade around him. For years ago, Ethan had believed he understood exactly why Emily had left. She had accused him of hiding things from her and said that someone had shown her evidence that he had been dishonest. Ethan had denied it again and again, but Emily had already made up her mind. Their conversations became colder. Their home became quiet. Eventually, they separated, and within months, their marriage was over. Ethan had never stopped loving Emily, but he had eventually accepted that some questions might never have answers. Now, holding that old note in his hand, he wondered whether the story he had accepted for 4 years had been incomplete. Lily tugged gently at his sleeve. "Dad, what does it say?" Ethan folded the paper carefully. "It is something from a long time ago. I need to understand it before I tell you anything." Lily nodded, but her expression remained worried. I saw Daniel looking for it yesterday, she said. Ethan looked toward the other side of the room. Daniel was standing beside Emily, greeting relatives and smiling politely. Nothing about him seemed unusual. That almost made Ethan more uneasy. Are you sure it was Daniel? He asked. Yes. He was in Mom's bedroom when she was downstairs. He opened the drawer beside her bed and looked through some papers. When he heard me coming, he closed it. Ethan did not respond immediately. He wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Daniel was helping Emily organize something. Maybe the paper had nothing to do with him. Maybe Lily had simply connected two unrelated events. But then Ethan remembered the look on Emily's face when he had mentioned that he and Lily were talking. She had looked nervous. He had known Emily for more than 10 years. He knew when she was pretending to be calm. Dad, Lily said softly, Mom was crying last night. Ethan looked down at her. Did she tell you why? Lily shook her head. She said she was fine, but she was sitting in her room holding an old picture of you. That sentence hurt more than Ethan expected. He had not heard anything like that from Emily in years. He had spent so long believing she wanted him completely out of her life that he had stopped wondering whether she ever looked back. Before Ethan could ask another question, Emily approached them. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes immediately moved to Ethan's jacket pocket. Is everything all right? She asked. Ethan held her gaze. Yes. Lily was just telling me about yesterday. Emily glanced at Lily, then back at him. About what? For the first time in 4 years, Ethan saw hesitation in the woman he had once known better than anyone. Nothing important, he replied. Emily nodded slowly, but she did not look convinced. Then Daniel walked over and placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. Everything ready for tomorrow? He asked. Emily smiled at him. Almost. Ethan watched the exchange carefully. Daniel looked at him and smiled. I hope you are comfortable being here, Ethan. I know this cannot be easy. Ethan gave a polite nod. I am here for Lily. Daniel smiled again. Of course. Then he walked away with Emily. Lily waited until they were several steps away before whispering, Dad, that is not the only thing I saw. Ethan turned toward her. What else did you see? Lily looked toward the hallway and lowered her voice. I saw Daniel talking to someone about you. Ethan stared at Lily, waiting for her to explain what she meant. Who was Daniel talking to? He asked quietly. Lily looked toward the hallway again before answering. A woman I had never seen before. Ethan felt his attention sharpen. What did she look like? She had blonde hair, a blue coat, and a little black purse. She was standing near the side entrance. Lily paused. Daniel told her that everything was almost finished. Ethan frowned. What did she say? I could not hear everything. But I heard her ask, are you sure Ethan will not find out? For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. The sentence seemed to echo in his mind. Are you sure Ethan will not find out? He looked across the room at Daniel, who was now laughing with Emily's parents as though he had nothing to hide. Ethan wanted to dismiss the conversation as a misunderstanding, but the old note in his pocket made that almost impossible. When did you hear this? He asked. Yesterday afternoon. And you did not tell Mom? Lily shook her head. I wanted to, but Daniel came into the room. Then he asked why I was listening. Ethan carefully chose his next words. Did he say anything else? Lily nodded. He told me that grown-up things were complicated and that I should not worry about them. Ethan gave a slow nod. That sounded reasonable enough on its own. But combined with the note, the old memories, and Emily's strange behavior, it created a pattern he could no longer ignore. Ethan glanced toward Emily. She was standing beside Daniel, listening to a relative talk about the wedding plans. Her expression was calm, but every few moments she looked toward Ethan. It was almost as if she wanted to say something but did not know how. Ethan remembered another version of Emily. Years earlier, she had been the woman who could read his face without asking a question. They had once shared everything, from small worries to impossible dreams. Then one evening, everything had changed. Emily had shown him a series of messages and accused him of lying to her. Ethan had insisted that the messages were not what they seemed. She had refused to believe him. He had never understood why she trusted those messages more than she trusted him. Now, for the first time, he wondered whether someone had wanted them to misunderstand each other. "Dad," Lily whispered, "there is something else." Ethan turned back to her. "What?" Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It showed Ethan and Emily standing together several years earlier, smiling beside a Christmas tree. Ethan recognized the picture immediately. It had been taken shortly before their marriage began to fall apart. "I found this in Mom's drawer," Lily said. There was something written on the back. Ethan turned the photograph over. In Emily's handwriting were 6 words that made his heart sink. "I should have listened to you then." He read the sentence again. Then he looked at the date written underneath it. The date was only 2 weeks after their divorce had been finalized. Ethan had no memory of Emily ever writing those words. "Why would Mom keep this?" Lily asked. Ethan did not have an answer. Before he could say anything, Emily appeared at the end of the hallway. Her eyes immediately settled on the photograph in Ethan's hand. She stopped walking. For one long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily quietly said, "Where did you get that?" Ethan looked at her, realizing that whatever happened 4 years ago, Emily knew more than she had ever told him. Emily stood completely still at the end of the hallway, her eyes fixed on the photograph in Ethan's hand. For a moment, the confident woman who had been greeting guests only minutes earlier seemed to disappear. "Where did you get that?" she asked again, more quietly this time. Ethan held the photograph between them. "Lily found it in your drawer." Emily looked at their daughter, then back at Ethan. "Lily should not have been going through my things." "She was not looking for secrets," Ethan said. "She was worried about you." Emily lowered her eyes. Ethan could see that she was trying to decide how much to say. "What does this mean?" he asked, turning the photograph around so she could see the words on the back. Emily stared at her own handwriting. "I wrote that after the divorce." "I know. But why?" She took a slow breath. "Because I was beginning to realize that I might have made a mistake." Ethan felt a wave of emotion, but he kept his voice steady. "You told me you were certain." Emily looked at him. "I thought I was." "You believed those messages were real?" "Yes." "And you believed I had lied to you?" Emily nodded. "At the time, I did." Ethan looked down at the photograph. "Then why did you write that you should have listened to me?" Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the main room where Daniel was still talking with the guests. Her expression changed when she saw him. "Because I found something after the divorce," she finally said. "Something that made me question everything." Ethan's attention sharpened. "What did you find?" Emily lowered her voice. "An email." "From who?" "I did not know at first." She paused. "But it was connected to the messages I had received." Ethan waited. "Why did you never tell me?" Emily looked away. "Because by then, you had already moved out. We had signed the papers. I thought telling you would only reopen everything." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. "You thought I would rather live with the idea that I betrayed you than know the truth?" "I was ashamed," Emily whispered. "I did not know how to admit that I might have been wrong." Ethan stared at her. For years of unanswered questions suddenly felt as though they were standing between them in the narrow hallway. "What did the email say?" Emily shook her head. "I do not have it anymore." Ethan looked at her carefully. "But you remember it?" "Every word." Before she could continue, Daniel's voice came from the other room. "Emily, everything all right?" Emily immediately straightened. Yes, she called back. Daniel appeared a moment later, smiling politely. His eyes moved from Emily to Ethan and then to the photograph. The smile on his face became slightly more restrained. I did not realize you were looking through old memories, he said. Ethan noticed that Daniel had not asked what the photograph was. He already seemed to know. Emily was just explaining something to me, Ethan replied. Daniel looked at Emily. There is nothing you need to explain tonight. Tomorrow is supposed to be a happy day. Emily gave him a small smile, but she did not answer. Daniel placed his attention on Ethan. Some things from the past are better left where they belong. Ethan met his eyes. Maybe. But sometimes the past explains why the present feels wrong. Daniel's expression remained calm, yet something in his eyes changed. Then he turned to Emily and asked her to come with him. Emily hesitated before following. As they walked away, she looked back at Ethan. Her expression carried a silent warning. Ethan waited until they disappeared into the crowd before looking at Lily. Did you see that? Lily nodded. Mom is scared to tell you something. Ethan slipped the photograph safely into his pocket. He had come to the rehearsal believing he was only there for his daughter. Now he knew the wedding was connected to a truth that had been hidden from him for 4 years. And somewhere inside that truth was an email Emily had never shown him, a stranger Lily had seen speaking with Daniel, and a question Ethan could no longer ignore, who had wanted him and Emily to believe the worst about each other. After Daniel and Emily disappeared into the crowded reception room, Ethan remained in the hallway with Lily, trying to make sense of everything he had just heard. For years ago, he had believed his marriage ended because Emily no longer trusted him. Now, for the first time, he wondered whether someone had given her a reason not to trust him. The thought stayed with him as he drove Lily home that evening. She sat quietly in the back seat, watching the lights pass outside the window. Ethan kept both hands on the steering wheel and tried not to let his thoughts race ahead of the facts. He had one clear goal. He needed to understand what happened before Emily married Daniel. When they arrived at his house, Lily went upstairs to get ready for bed while Ethan sat at the kitchen table and studied the old photograph. He turned it over again. I should have listened to you then. 6 words written by Emily after their divorce. 6 words that could change everything he thought he knew. His phone rang. It was Emily. Ethan answered immediately. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Emily said, Ethan, I need you to promise me something. What? Do not confront Daniel tonight. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Why? Because I need time to explain. You have had 4 years. Emily became quiet. Ethan regretted the sharpness in his voice, but he could not take the words back. I know, she said softly. And I am sorry. Ethan looked at the photograph on the table. Tell me about the email. Emily took a breath. It came from an account I did not recognize. The person claimed to have proof that you were hiding money from me and planning to leave our family. Ethan frowned. That never happened. I know that now. What made you change your mind? Emily hesitated. The details were too specific. The person knew things about our marriage that only a few people knew. Ethan thought about that. Who had access to those details? You, me, and a few people close to us. Daniel? Emily did not answer. That silence told Ethan more than words could have. Emily, he said carefully, when did Daniel become involved? After we separated. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Then why did he know so much about our marriage? I do not know. But you suspected him. I started to. Emily's voice trembled slightly. That is why I wrote the note on the photograph. I realized I might have judged you based on information that was never verified. Ethan stared at the kitchen window. Why did you still agree to marry him? Emily remained silent for several seconds. Because he was there when I was trying to rebuild my life. He helped me when I felt lost. Over time, I convinced myself that what happened between us was simply the end of our marriage. Ethan slowly nodded. And now? Now I am not sure anymore. Before Ethan could respond, Emily whispered, "There is something else you need to know. I found an old copy of that email last week." Ethan sat upright. "You said you did not have it." "I thought I did not. But I found it inside an old storage box this morning." "Where is it?" Emily paused. "At the house." Ethan waited. "And there is a name attached to it," she finally said. "A name I never expected to see." Ethan asked, "Whose name?" Emily lowered her voice. "Daniel Brooks." For several seconds Ethan could not speak. Daniel Brooks. The name he had just heard was the same name written on the email Emily had kept hidden for 4 years. "Are you certain?" Ethan finally asked. "Yes," Emily replied. "I found the message this morning. His name was attached to the account information." Ethan stood from the kitchen table and walked toward the window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, completely different from the confusion inside his mind. "Why did you not tell me at the rehearsal?" he asked. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Emily's voice became softer. "Afraid that if I told you, everything would become real." Ethan understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. For 4 years, both of them had avoided the possibility that their marriage might have ended because of something neither had fully understood. "Where is the email?" he asked. "In my desk at home." "I will come get it." Emily hesitated. "Ethan, please be careful about what you say to Daniel." "I am not going to accuse him of anything." "Good. But I need to see the evidence." "I know." Ethan heard Lily coming down the stairs and lowered his voice. "Emily, there is one more thing. Lily told me she saw Daniel talking to a woman yesterday." Emily went silent. "What woman?" "We do not know. Blonde hair, blue coat, black purse." Lily heard her ask Daniel whether he was sure I would not find out. Emily's breathing changed. "Ethan, that description sounds familiar." "Who is she?" "I do not know her name, but I saw her once at Daniel's office." Ethan frowned. "Why did you never mention that?" "Because I thought she was a client." Emily paused. "But now I am not so sure." Lily entered the kitchen carrying a glass of water. Ethan turned toward her and gave her a reassuring smile. "Go get ready for bed, sweetheart. I will be upstairs soon." Lily nodded and left. Ethan returned his attention to the phone. "Emily, what happened between us 4 years ago was not just a misunderstanding, was it?" Emily was quiet for so long that Ethan thought the call had ended. Then she whispered, "No. I do not think it was." Ethan felt the weight of those words. "Then tell me everything." "I will. But not over the phone." "When?" "Tomorrow morning. Before the ceremony." Ethan glanced at the clock. It was nearly 10 o'clock. The wedding was less than 12 hours away. "All right," he said. "But I need to ask you one question tonight." "What?" "Do you still trust Daniel?" Emily did not answer. That silence was enough. After the call ended, Ethan stood alone in the kitchen. He opened the photograph again and looked at Emily's handwriting. "I should have listened to you then." Suddenly, another detail came back to him. 4 years earlier, just before Emily asked for the divorce, Daniel had sent Ethan a message for the first time. Ethan had forgotten about it because the message seemed ordinary at the time. He went to his phone and searched through his old records. There it was. A short message from Daniel, sent 3 days before Emily confronted him about the supposed evidence. Ethan read it twice. The message said that some relationships ended because people refused to see the truth. At the time, Ethan had thought it was strange. Now it felt like a warning. He opened the message details and stared at the date. Then he noticed something else. Daniel had contacted him before Emily had ever shown him the messages that destroyed their marriage. Ethan slowly sat down. If Daniel had known about the situation before Emily told Ethan, then Daniel had not simply entered Emily's life after the divorce. He might have been connected to the events that caused it. Ethan looked toward the stairs where Lily had gone to bed. Tomorrow was supposed to be Emily's wedding day. Instead, it might become the day Ethan finally discovered why his family had fallen apart. The next morning arrived with a strange quietness that Ethan could not shake. He woke before sunrise, barely having slept, and spent several minutes staring at the old message on his phone. Daniel had contacted him 3 days before Emily confronted him about the supposed evidence. At the time, Ethan had dismissed the message as an odd comment from a man he barely knew. Now it seemed like another piece of a puzzle that had been waiting 4 years to be solved. By 7 o'clock, Ethan was driving toward Emily's house with Lily beside him. The streets were already busy with people heading to work, but the morning felt unusually slow. Lily watched her father carefully. "Are you going to talk to Mom?" she asked. "Yes." "About Daniel?" Ethan nodded. "About everything." When they arrived, Emily opened the door before Ethan could knock twice. She was dressed simply, without the formal wedding clothes she had planned to wear later that day. Her face looked tired. "Come in," she said. Ethan entered with Lily, and Emily immediately hugged their daughter. Lily held on tightly before stepping back. "Are you okay, Mom?" Emily smiled gently. "I will be." Ethan followed Emily into the study. On the desk was a small storage box. Emily opened it and removed a printed email, several old documents, and an envelope. She handed the email to Ethan. He read the first lines and immediately recognized the accusations. The message claimed that Ethan had been planning to move money into a separate account and leave Emily responsible for their household expenses. It also claimed that Ethan had been communicating with another woman and was preparing to start a new life without Emily. Ethan looked up. None of this was true. "I know," Emily said. "But look at the date." Ethan checked it. The email had been sent 2 days before he had ever heard those accusations. "Whoever wrote this knew exactly what would make me doubt you," Emily said. Ethan studied the printed page. "And you said Daniel's name was connected to the account?" Emily nodded. "Look at the bottom." Ethan found a small string of information beneath the message. The account had been created using a business address connected to Daniel's company. Ethan looked at Emily. "Why did you keep this from me?" "Because I was afraid that if I admitted I had been wrong, I would have to face everything I had done." Her eyes filled with regret. "I thought I had ruined our marriage because I stopped trusting you. I did not know that someone else had helped create that doubt." Ethan was silent. He wanted to be angry, but seeing Emily finally confront the truth made his anger feel smaller than the sadness he had carried for years. Then Emily opened the envelope. Inside was another printed page. "I found this last night," she said. Ethan read it carefully. It was a message from the same account, but this time it had been sent to Daniel. The message contained one sentence: "She believes him now. We need to move quickly." Ethan looked at Emily. "Who is we?" Emily shook her head. "I do not know." Before Ethan could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway. "Mom?" Emily turned. "Yes, sweetheart?" Lily looked nervous. "The woman from yesterday is here." Ethan and Emily exchanged a glance. "Where?" Ethan asked. Lily pointed toward the front window. "She is standing outside with Daniel." Emily slowly walked to the window. Her expression changed the moment she saw the woman. "I know her," she whispered. Ethan stood beside her. "Who is she?" Emily looked at him, then back outside. "She was my assistant 4 years ago." The woman looked toward the house, and for a moment, her eyes met Emily's through the glass. Then Daniel leaned toward her and said something that made her immediately step back. Ethan watched them walk away from the driveway. The wedding was only hours away, but now there was a new question that mattered more than the ceremony itself. Why had Emily's former assistant returned on the morning of the wedding, and what did she know about the secret that had kept Ethan and Emily apart for 4 years? Ethan remained by the window long after Daniel and the woman had disappeared from view. Emily stood beside him, staring at the empty driveway with an expression he had never seen before. "Her name is Sarah Miller," Emily finally said. "She worked for me 4 years ago." Ethan looked at her. "And you are certain she was involved with Daniel?" "I do not know that. But she knew things about our marriage that I had never told her." Lily stood quietly near the doorway, listening. Emily noticed and walked over to her. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay with your father for a little while." Lily nodded. "Are you still getting married today?" Emily looked at Ethan before answering. "I do not know." Those words seemed to change the atmosphere in the room. Only a few hours earlier, Emily had been preparing for a wedding. Now she was standing in her own home surrounded by documents that suggested the foundation of that marriage had been built on a lie. Ethan picked up the envelope from the desk. "We need to find Sarah." Emily nodded. "I know where she might go." They left the house together, with Lily safely beside Ethan. As they drove across town, Emily explained that Sarah had worked as her assistant during the final year of her marriage. Sarah had access to schedules, emails, household information, and many private conversations. "Why did she leave?" Ethan asked. "She said she wanted to move to another state. She resigned suddenly." "And you never heard from her again?" "Not until today." They arrived at a small coffee shop about 15 minutes later. Sarah was sitting near the back window, holding a cup of coffee with both hands. When she saw Emily, she immediately stood. "I did not know if you would believe me," Sarah said. Emily sat across from her. "Believe what?" Sarah looked at Ethan. "That I am sorry." Ethan remained quiet. Sarah opened her purse and placed a small flash drive on the table. "I kept copies of some emails because I was worried something would happen to the records." Emily stared at the device. "Why did you keep them?" "Because I knew the messages being sent to you were not coming from Ethan." Ethan felt his heart tighten. "Who sent them?" Sarah looked down. "Daniel." Emily closed her eyes for a moment. Sarah continued. "Daniel had been asking questions about your marriage for months. At first, I thought he was simply concerned about you. Then I realized he was collecting information." "Why?" Ethan asked. Sarah shook her head. "I never understood his entire plan. But I saw him use information from your private files to create messages that looked as though they came from other people." Emily's face turned pale. "Why did you not tell me?" Sarah looked ashamed. "I was afraid of losing my job, and I was embarrassed that I had trusted him. When I finally understood what was happening, you and Ethan were already separated." Ethan looked at Emily. The silence between them carried years of pain, but for the first time, the pain had an explanation. Sarah pushed the flash drive toward Ethan. "There is one more thing." Ethan looked at her. "What?" "The messages were not the only reason Daniel wanted your marriage to end." Emily leaned forward. "Then what was?" Sarah took a slow breath. "Daniel knew that if you and Ethan stayed together, you would never agree to something he wanted." Ethan frowned. "What did he want?" Sarah looked directly at Emily. "Your family property." Emily's eyes widened. The wedding was supposed to begin in less than 2 hours. Now Ethan finally understood that the mystery was bigger than a broken marriage. Daniel had not simply entered Emily's life after the divorce. He had been waiting for the right moment to become part of it. And if Sarah was telling the truth, the wedding was never really about love at all. For a few seconds, Ethan simply stared at Sarah, unable to process what she had just said. Emily looked equally stunned. The family property had never been something they discussed with outsiders. It had belonged to Emily's parents for years, and after her father's retirement, Emily had become responsible for managing it. How did Daniel know about it? Ethan asked. Sarah looked at Emily. He found out through the financial documents he had access to. He knew that if you and Emily remained together, you would both have to agree before anything could be changed. Emily slowly shook her head. That was why he kept asking about our finances. Sarah nodded. I believe so. Ethan looked at the flash drive on the table. Then we need to know exactly what is on this. Sarah pushed it toward him. Everything I saved is there. They returned to Emily's house, where Ethan connected the flash drive to her computer. There were dozens of files, most of them old emails and documents from the months before the divorce. Ethan opened them one at a time. The first messages showed Daniel asking Sarah harmless questions about Emily's schedule. Then the questions became more personal. He wanted to know when Ethan was home, what meetings he attended, and what financial decisions he and Emily were discussing. Ethan felt a chill of realization. Daniel had been gathering information long before anyone considered him part of Emily's future. Then they found the messages that had changed everything. One email instructed Sarah to send Emily a document designed to make Ethan appear dishonest. Sarah had not followed the instruction, but someone else had. Emily covered her mouth as she read it. This was the document I saw, she whispered. Ethan looked at the date. It had been sent shortly before Emily confronted him 4 years earlier. Another file revealed that Daniel had contacted a financial advisor about the family property shortly after the divorce. Emily stared at the screen. He was planning this before we were even separated. Ethan nodded. It looks that way. For the first time, Emily began to cry quietly. I spent 4 years blaming you. Ethan sat beside her. You believed what you were shown. But I should have trusted you. Ethan looked at her. I wish you had. Emily lowered her head. I am sorry. Ethan did not answer immediately. He had waited years to hear those words, yet now that they had finally arrived, they did not erase what had happened. They only opened the door to something different. Lily appeared in the doorway. Mom? Emily wiped her eyes and looked at her daughter. Yes, sweetheart? Lily walked over and held her mother's hand. Are you still going to marry Daniel? Emily looked at Ethan, then at Lily. No, the word was quiet but certain. A few minutes later, Emily called Daniel and told him the wedding was cancelled. She did not argue with him or make a scene. She simply said that she had discovered information she could no longer ignore and that she would not continue with the ceremony. When the call ended, Emily sat quietly beside Ethan and Lily. Outside, the morning sun had begun to fill the room. Ethan looked at Emily. What happens now? She asked. He thought about the years they had lost, the trust that had been broken, and the daughter who had unknowingly brought them back to the truth. We take things one day at a time, he said. Emily nodded. Do you think there is any chance for us? Ethan looked at Lily, who was smiling between them. Then he looked back at Emily. Not for the people we were 4 years ago. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Ethan continued softly, but maybe for the people we have become. Emily reached for his hand, and this time Ethan did not pull away. They did not promise to rebuild their marriage that day. They did not pretend the past had disappeared. They simply sat together as a family, knowing that the truth had finally given them something they had not had in years, a chance to begin again.